We're going to look at Daniel chapter 6 this evening. Daniel chapter 6. And like we've been doing, we're just going to go through the chapter and kind of hit some highlights. I'm going to what I did was it looks really weird. Everybody's sitting back there. we got to move that back row closer. We're lopsided. I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit, but we'll end up covering nearly every verse. But I want to look at what's happening now. The lion's den. Everybody knows the story of the lion's den, right? I mean, we've heard that probably in church a lot. And as we've gone through Daniel, I've tried to sort of bring up some things maybe we haven't ever considered before. And the first thing is Daniel was probably about 70 years old when this happened. So he was probably in his very early 70s. Well, he was in his very early 70s when this occurred. I told you last week that we're going to start talking about different names. Daniel's not necessarily, or it's not a chronological book. It kind of jumps around. Next week we're going to be talking about visions that he had when he was a younger man. So it kind of goes back and forth. But the whole premise that I started this with was to kind of get to the visions. And I was actually going to start right in chapter 7. But I'm really glad that we have worked our way to it, because it honestly has helped me understand a lot of what we see in our world today. And if you go back and look at all the events that have occurred and the stories that we've seen through the first 5 chapters, we've been assured that God's in absolute control. We've been assured that God puts leaders when God would have them. There's a purpose that He has leaders there. Whether they're evil or whether they're good, God's got purpose. And the great thing is He's in absolute control. He's sovereign. Nothing passes His countenance that He doesn't understand and know and is aware of, and that we can have great faith in that. Now tonight we're going to look at some events in the lives in the life of Daniel that involves some perpetrators. There's a dastardly plot against Daniel. It has all the intrigue of jealousy and resentment and greed and power. Literally murder is involved, or would have been. And if you were to write a book on this chapter or make a movie of it, I think it would be a good movie. It could be a suspenseful thriller. It really could. But what I want us to do is look at it sort of through the eyes of Daniel. I don't want us, obviously, I'm going to try to bring some real life lessons that we can learn from this. But I'd like us to kind of look at this through the eyes of Daniel. Daniel at 70 has proven his worth. Under the Babylonian captivity, he was moved to leadership positions and almost really given all the way to the third of the rule, but that only lasted a night. And then when the Medes and Persians come in, he is going to again have a great place of responsibility with authority. So God has prospered Daniel. God has blessed Daniel. God has used Daniel. God has placed Daniel in an enviable place with some others that resent him because of who he is. Because he is an exile. He is one that has come in and he has taken a place and he's moved up, and people just don't think he should have. And so with that in mind, let's sort of walk through this and kind of get a glimpse of what's happening. And why he ended up in a lion's den. Now, I'm going to call the first part the plot. And we're going to look at verses 1 through 9, and then I'm going to skip down at verse 11, and then I'm going to skip down to verse 15. So we're going to look at the plot against Daniel and kind of get an idea of what's happened. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. These are provinces. These are places designated. Maybe kind of like our counties, if you will, to give you an idea. So he set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps may give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because of an excellent spirit that was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find no fault or any charge because Daniel was faithful, nor there was any error or was any fault found in Daniel. Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So the governors and the satraps thronged together before the king and said to him, and I've always said King Darius, it's actually King Darius. King Darius lived forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators, the satraps, the counselors, advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. So this is the plot, okay? Now, verse 11. Then these same men assembled, and they found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, it is true. This thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but he makes his petition 3 times a day. And then in verse 15, we see where the men again approached the king and said, know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. And so we see the plot. The perpetrators, of course, are these leaders. It is a well-planned scheme, is exactly what it is. They took the faithfulness and commitment of Daniel to the Lord his God, and they trapped him. Literally what they did. Now, you would think, okay, the king should have authority to do anything he wants to. But according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, any decree that is signed by the king cannot be altered, even by the king himself. Now, they knew that well when they did that. They knew that once this decree was written and signed, that by the law of the Medes and Persians, regardless of how the king felt, it had to be passed. It had to come to pass. And then they did that. They did that because in the end, they didn't want just Daniel not being in a place of authority. They wanted him gone. They wanted him dead. That's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to commit murder by a legal loophole. That's exactly what they did. And that's exactly their scheme. And it's evil. As a matter of fact, I thought in my mind, why would somebody do something like that? They were jealous. They were filled with jealousy. They were filled with greed. They wanted power. They wanted position. They were angry because Daniel seemed to be in charge and that he seemed to have more authority given, and they didn't want him to have and be over that whole province. They chose to slander him. And it was a lie, they said, by the way, because Daniel wanted good for the king. He wasn't against the king. That was a lie. Now, he wasn't going to alter his commitment to God. But he never was against King Darius. So that was a lie, and that's slander. They had a rage toward him because they wanted him not just to be punished or not to be embarrassed. They want him dead. Ultimately, it reveals evil. It reveals evil. Now listen, I don't think that any of us in here would put ourselves in a position to see such a plan and a plot hosted against us. I just don't think you would. We could, but I don't see that. But I'll tell you this. Wherever you find yourself working, wherever you find yourself, I remember one of my best friends, when he graduated from college, his entire goal was to move into a firm, work like a dog the first several years, like what does Hayden do? He was an accountant. Can't even think. He was CPA. And so he wanted to move up that ladder, and in the end, he wanted to be successful, and he wasn't greedy. He just wanted to be in a position where one day that he might own his own place or whatever. He got in, and he got in a firm, and he called me one day, and he said, man, this just isn't what I thought. It's just a bunch of backstabbing, dog-eat-dog people. Don't care about anybody else but themselves. But isn't that true just about anywhere in this world today? Just backstabbing, dog-eat-dog, look out for number one, do unto others before they do unto you, then that kind of thought. And it's just a world, it's a mindset. And folks, when the Bible talks about the world as a part of the enemy, it's not talking about the trees and the people and the flowers. It's talking about the system. And it's there. There's just no doubt about it. Now, we kind of see it at its worst here. But I want us to think about some things. James tells us this in James chapter 4. James wrote, where do wars and fights come from among you? This is just your struggle within you. Do they not come from your desire for pleasure that war in your members? You lust and don't have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. And that brings it very practical to us that if we're not careful within any of us, we can find ourselves wanting, and by the way, we could add lust to that's that lust for that power and lust for that position and lust for that recognition. We can find ourselves in that same place, and in doing so, we can hurt people, and we can walk over people, and we can do it sometimes with the best of intentions. So we are subject to that ourselves, and we certainly could have it done toward us. The psalmist wrote this in Psalm 31, pull me out of the net which they have secretly laid for me, for you, God, are my strength. And that is recognizing somebody who has laid out a snare, somebody who's laid that out for them to step into, and they've done that so they can trap them. Kind of that aha moment. We live in gotcha politics today, don't we? We see it all over the place. And so we live in that today. Folks, look, when somebody's gunning for you, you can be set up in a heartbeat. You can be set up in a heartbeat. And when you recognize that, there is a way to respond. There is a way to respond. Psalm chapter 57, verse 6. Now, I'm reading this out of the New Living Translation, this one verse. But it says, my enemies have set a trap for me. I am weary from distress. They have dug a deep pit in my path, but they themselves have fallen into it. And in this, the psalmist recognized that the enemies that are in his life who are trying to take him down have literally dug a pit, symbolically, but they have dug a pit for him to fall into. And the psalmist said, all their schemes and all the netting and all the stuff, they fell into it. They did. I've seen this happen before. As a matter of fact, I've seen a very good Christian person under absolute assault through a secular means into the courts, things that just broke my heart. Vengeful. And as I didn't even know how to pray for them. I didn't even know how to pray. And I was angry. I wanted to step up and be counted for in that, but I couldn't. And I didn't know what to do. And one morning in a time of devotion, I came across these scriptures that I just read to you in Psalms. And I said, God, this you set the leadership free here when others intended for them harm. You let them get snagged in their own little devious trap. I said, now, Lord, here's what I want to ask you. These people that are trying to harm this sister in the Lord, let them get caught in their own schemes and devices, and in the end, where they seek to do harm, let them get caught up in their own little plot. And I began to pray that. I shared that with Tracy to pray. We began to pray that, and guess what happened? They did. They got caught up in their own little trap. And I thought that was the neatest thing. I know it sounds vengeful, but it wasn't. Because in the end, everything that should have happened did happen. And it should be that way. Now, if somebody is against you and they are slandering you, if you have someone who is making a plan to harm you by catching you unaware or to catch you in a place, if somebody is spreading rumor or innuendo about you seeking to harm your reputation, I want to tell you something. Your reputation and character is really what matters in this world. It's who you are. And as a pastor, I learned a long time ago, if you think that you've got to go and fight every accusation against you in battle or any word spoken to clear your name, you will wear yourself out, and it's not worth it. And it literally can become a matter of pride on our part, thinking that we've got to be right or we've got to have our part said. You know, you can just wear yourself out. Now, when Daniel hears the decree and he hears what's been signed, he knew what was going on. And he did what we have to do. He prayed about it. But I'm telling you, the perpetrators here, they had a plan. They had a plot. Later, they're going to petition the king. And they're even going to pressure him because they want Daniel removed. And they do so with slander and lie. Charles Spurgeon shared something in a sermon that I have held on to for years. And I wanted to share it with you. It's something that I go back to and I remind myself of. It's something that I think is important. If you're going to live for the Lord and you're going to live uncompromisingly, whatever position you have in this world, you will be attacked for your stand for Christ. I promise you will. If you're serious about it, you will. You will. And when you are, you have a choice. You can retaliate, you can try to make your point, or you can take it to the Lord. And these words have always meant a lot to me. Charles Spurgeon said this: "It is of little use to appeal to our fellows on the matter of slander, for the more we stir in it, the more it spreads. It is of no avail to appeal to the honor of the slanderers, for they have none. And the most piteous demands for justice will only increase their malignity and encourage them to fresh insult. You might as well plead with panthers and wolves as with black-hearted traducers. However, when cries to man would be our weakness, cries to God will be our strength. To whom should children cry but to their Father? Does not some good come out, even that vile thing, falsehood, if it drives us to our knees and drives us to our God?" Now, that's taking the high road. See, that's taking the high road, isn't it, Debbie? And so you can do one of two things. You can say, okay, my name has been sullied. Somebody's after me. I recognize what they're doing. I'm going to put a stop to it. Or you can say, God, it's your battle, not mine. How you like that? Now, my wife, not my enemy, no plotting, nothing. Tracy one time had a headhunter after her. She didn't want to tell me about it. And it finally kind of came to a head, and she kind of had to tell me about it. And, you know, attacks on me don't go very far because I just really don't care. And if you're a preacher, you better have titanium hide or you won't last very long. But, boy, when somebody goes after my wife or one of my kids, now, I'm going to tell you something. That gets to me. I'm not giving anybody fodder. Don't do it. Come to me. Come after me. Don't mess with her. But let me tell you what I did in this. I didn't know what to do. I was a young pastor. It was pretty bad. It was something that I thought was dangerous even for the church. And I'm going to tell you what I did. And this was, I assure you that I'm more mature now than I was then. I just didn't know what to do. Now, today I would have confronted and talked and tried to settle it and then just let it go if it wouldn't, because it involved leadership. But what I did is I went on my back patio of the parsonage we lived in, and I got on my knees on the lounge chair back there, and I said, Lord, I don't know what to do, and I'm going to have to give it to you, and I'm going to leave it here. That ended up being a wise thing to do, because after that, he took care of it. He did. He took care of it the way I wouldn't have done it, but he took care of it so well. It's done been took care of for 30 years now. I mean, it was totally taken care of. And I know that he did that. I know that he did that. And so in that, I learned a valuable lesson. Now, since then, when people take pot shots at you, you want to think, oh, you know, I got. No, you don't. You don't have to. You're not going to get anywhere. I like what Spurgeon said. When you try to make it, all you're going to do is stir it and spread it everywhere else. There just comes a time when you got to quit stirring. And you just got to walk away. And you say, well, that's weakness. Do you know who the master of that was? Jesus Christ. The meekest man that ever walked on this earth. And let me tell you, the most powerful, had more power under control, could hold his tongue when they accused him, when they insulted him, as they abused him at the end of his life. The Bible says he remained silent as a sheep led to the slaughter. And that's our example, folks. And you say, well, I'll tell you this, if you don't stand up for yourself, nobody else will. God will take care of it. Now, it may not be in this lifetime. God will take care of it. And you don't have to wear yourself out for that. And I mean that, okay? If I can learn anything from this lesson, I want to be reminded that we do not have to fret and worry when we're threatened. And folks, I think Christianity is going to see threatening soon. If we stand for truth and we don't back down, we will become a target sooner or later of all the vengeful hate and disarray that we see in this world today. We are. I'm just going to tell you we are. If you stand for the Lord, you will, okay? So we have a plot, and we're seeing that happen. Now, the plot is toward a person, and Daniel is his name. Now, we know here that it said in verse 4 that they began looking for some fault in the way Daniel was handling things, but they couldn't find any. They couldn't find anything to criticize him about. And they couldn't find anything to condemn him about. Do you know why? It's real simple. The first thing was Daniel was faithful. He was faithful to King Darius. He was faithful to the responsibilities that were given to him. He wasn't slack. He wasn't careless. He didn't have attitude of not caring. He committed his life to bringing honor and glory to the Lord in the midst of really still being a slave to whoever's in charge. 70 years of his life, he has lived with the goal of honoring God in the midst of all these difficulties. He's faithful. He's not negligent. He's not neglecting anything that King Darius set him over. He's not done anything wrong. He's innocent. Folks, I want to tell you something. He's also not corrupt like they were. They're corrupt. He wasn't. He had no guile or motive above which he was asked to do. And he took that seriously. 1 Peter 3:16 and 17. And listen, if you want to memorize a good verse in the days that I think are coming, this is a good one. 1 Peter 3, like John 3:16, 2 Timothy 3. There's several 3:16s we should memorize. This is one. 1 Peter 3:16, 17. Having a good conscience, that when they defame you as evildoers, those who revile your good conduct in Christ may be ashamed. For it is better, if it is the will of God, to suffer for doing good than to suffer for doing evil. If we're going to suffer, let's suffer for doing good. Let's suffer for taking the high road. Let's suffer for honoring Christ. Let's suffering for being committed to the stead in which we've been committed to do. And we owe no apologies for that. But if they do begin to slander you, let your conduct and your manner of life and how you're living, and let me tell you something, your true Christianity is going to be shown in how you react, not how you act. Reactions are where you really find out what you're made of. When somebody comes, you can act all you want to in church. Let somebody come after you, and let somebody degrade you, and let somebody insult you. That reaction is going to show what we're made of. It really does. I mean, think about it. It does. So when they do that, by your good conduct, they can be ashamed. They can just make a fool out of themselves. Let them do it. It's no skin off your back. You be true to the Lord and don't back down, okay? And that's just how you got to do it. Now, the reaction. And by the way, we've learned so much about Daniel. I think we got enough to know that he was faithful, he wasn't corrupt, and he did what was asked of him. And so we can stop there. Now the reaction, and I love this. I wrote this down I was kind of imagining I was Daniel. Daniel heard the decree. Let's just look at verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, and he prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since the early days. Since the days they were kept captive, he looked toward Jerusalem from where they were captured, and he praised God, and he lifted his petitions to God, and he honored God 3 times a day. And he was such a man of character, and he was so committed that even his enemies knew that he did it. Christian, do your enemies know that you're sold out for Jesus Christ? Do they know your habits so well that they could use it against you? Let me tell you what I thought of when I read this. Daniel found out it was done, and this is kind of what I thought to him. Now, these are my words, and this might have a little bud in it, okay? I'm just going to tell you. But I saw it this way, where Daniel thought, I don't have the need, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, and I don't have the desire to try to fix this. I just need to do what I've always done. I'm going to take it to the Lord in prayer. That's what I'm going to do. Now, let me tell you something. When most of everything that happens to us, truthfully, and I'm just going to be truthful, we take care of it. We talk our way out of it. We charm our way out of it. We can buy our way out of it. We can do whatever we can do. But there's times in your life and events that are going to happen to you when you can't do any of that. Those moments will drive you to your knees before God if you're a believer. And in that moment, you will pray the purest prayers you've ever prayed. Kind of foxhole praying. When it really down to it, laying it down there. Let's learn to do that before we get to that moment. And just give it to the Lord. What needless pain we bear, all because we don't do what? Take it to the Lord in prayer. And so we can have confidence in God, even if it seems like the world's against us. We do not have to compromise our stand for the Lord, okay? That's what Daniel did. He went and he prayed, okay? Now, let me say something else here, too. I want you to see this real quickly. When they petitioned the king and brought it before him to present it, I want you to see the king's heart for just a moment. Verse 12, they went before the king. They spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast? The king answered, this is true according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, and it does not alter. So once they had him, they thought, trapped in his words, which in a way they did by the law, they answered and said to the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, king, or this decree. Okay? Now look at verse 14. The king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself. He knew that he'd been had. They snookered the king. So he knew that happened. He set his heart on Daniel to deliver him and labored till the end of the day, the going down the sun, to deliver him from this decree. The king knew that Daniel was innocent. Does a story come to y'all's mind when you hear this story? Does anything come to your mind when you hear this story? False accusations. A leader recognizes that they're false and fake and the person they're accusing is innocent. Does anybody see a similarity to something? We celebrate it in a few weeks. Isn't this interesting? Yeah, he did. He said, I find no fault in this man. He's done nothing wrong. I mean, I just do. I can't help it. I just do, okay? Verse 15. Then they came again. King, it's the law of the Persians, blah, blah, blah. They just told him it can't be changed. So in verse 16, the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel, and they cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke to Daniel and said, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. The king, who's the reason he's getting thrown in there, knows that the God that Daniel serves is faithful. What a testimony from a pagan king. Now, let's think about the lions for just a minute. The lions den, the lions served a purpose. They weren't like a zoo lion. They actually weren't fed very much. They were kept on the edge of nearly starvation for one reason and one reason only. They were the capital punishment. They were the lethal injection. They were the noose. They were the, that's what they did. People were thrown into the line of dens. That was capital punishment. That's how they did it. So these lions weren't pets. They weren't trophies. They weren't something to showcase in the palace and see the majestic. The lions were there for one reason, because a lion is a lion. There was a lion in the zoo, the lion in the circus, and they had the lion in a cage. And there was a monkey in a cage near the lion. And all day that monkey would take a piece of food and he'd throw it on top of the cage of that lion, trying to tick him off. And the lion couldn't do anything about it. Well, the owners of the zoo didn't know anything. The circus didn't know anything about it. And the lion started losing weight. The lion quit eating. The lion wouldn't perform. He couldn't figure out what was going on. The owners couldn't. So they called vet after vet in. They checked the lion. There was nothing physically wrong with him. They just didn't know what to do. They called in a trainer who came and checked the lion out. And while the trainer was there, just observing the lion, he saw the monkey throwing the food on top of that cage. And he figured out real quickly what was going on. And he looked at the owners and he said, I know the solution to your problem. They said, what is it? He said, open the door to the lion's cage. Let the lion act like a lion. And the monkey will start acting like a monkey. Now let that sink in. Folks, listen to me. I thought to myself, I want to make some clever, I want everybody to think how smart I am. And I'm going to say, what did the lion represent? I worked so hard on that, and I thought, and I schemed, and I read, and I did everything I could. And I'm here to tell you, the lion served one purpose, to be a lion. I can't find anything figurative to make it. But I'll tell you this. We serve the Lion of the tribe of Judah, depicted in Revelation as a victorious king. Folks, listen. In this case, I can't make any spiritual connection to the lion. Now, you can. I've tried. That lion was there for a reason. They threw him in there, and those lions were hungry, and their job was to kill Daniel or anybody that came in. The lions were retribution, and that's just what they were. And I really couldn't find anything else in that, and I tried. But let me tell you, in the midst of the lion's den, I did find something. And we know the story, but I want us to look at it very carefully. When King Darius told him and told Daniel, your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. The next verses tell us, or verse 18 says, the king went to his palace. He spent the night fasting. No musicians were brought before him. His sleep went from him. The king arose very early in the morning. He went with haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice. The lamenting voice was, although he prayed and fasted, he really didn't believe on the God of Daniel. He had faith that he would be delivered, but I really believe that Darius knew what lions did. So with a lamenting voice, the king spoke and said, Daniel, servant of the living God, Has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Can you imagine I can't even imagine the shock that went through the body of King Darius when Daniel from that, by the way, I missed a big part of the story. When they put him in the lion's den, they rolled a stone over the opening, and it was signed with a signet so that it could not be disturbed. Does that ring a bell? I mean, golly, it just says so much about Christ. So the next morning, Daniel said, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." He never said a word, but now that he's been delivered, he's going to stand for truth. Now, the angel. Where have we seen an angel before? In Daniel. Y'all remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? There was an angel that appeared, and what did the king declare rather loudly? That he appeared to be what? The Son of God. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever. Now, God has ministering spirits, angels, and God sends angels, and God uses angels. But I have no doubt in my mind that the same person that appeared to deliver these three young boys was the same angel that appeared to take care of Daniel. Listen to me. In a place of death, in the valley of the shadow of death is where Daniel was. Thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. They support me. They protect me. Folks, no matter how bleak it gets, our God will be there. We can have faith in that. Now, here's what kills me. And I don't mean this ugly or anything, but a lot of people in this room don't believe that. Because we fret and worry over things that do not matter when we have a God that's all-powerful, that can do anything. The disciples prayed this, "Lord, help mine unbelief." Would we be willing to declare that there's many times our actions are more actions of unbelief than they are of belief? Seriously. Now look, Daniel didn't have a choice. He could have died. God saw fit to shut the mouths of lions so that they would not hurt him. And then let me say something else. The den should have been his tomb, sealed. He should have died there, but he didn't. He came out of that tomb, but guess what happened to the instigators, the perpetrators? Now listen, because we have some young children here, I'm not going to go in the detail of what happened to them. But let me just tell you, when Darius was through with them, there was no future for their bloodline at all. Everything was removed. Every piece of genetic material that they could ever bring children from was destroyed that day. Not only did the perpetrators' lives ended, but everything associated with them, lives ended. And the mouths of the lions weren't shut then. Now, we recognize that God is a God of love and faith. He's a God of patience. Aren't you glad that He's a God of second chances? Aren't you glad He's a God of third chances and fourth chances, that He is long-suffering? Aren't you glad that God puts up with us? I know I am. But that same God eventually says enough is enough. And He will drop the hammer like it has never been dropped before. And you know, when I read Revelation and I see as the beginning of the wrath of God is poured out on this earth, at the very beginning of it, the kings, the ones who are in authority, the ones that have people that at their beck and call, the ones who think that nothing can upset their kingdom, This is our future. The people on earth in leadership, they're going to go into the deepest hole they can find. They're going to climb into the deepest cave that they can get to. And then they're going to cry to that mountain, fall on me, bury me, hide me from him who sits on the throne. Because the day of his wrath has come. I can't even imagine that. And yet we see a piece of it here. Let me tell you something else too. Jerusalem and the Jewish people who called for the death of Jesus Christ. Jerusalem and the Jewish people who denied their Messiah. When Jesus said one stone will not be left on the other of this temple, it came to pass. And Jerusalem was absolutely leveled and forsaken. And I believe that was part of God's judgment for the death of his son. I do. Now, he delivered the Jews through that time. There's wonderful historical lessons in that. But what a sad time it was. The ones who came in and routed Jerusalem at that, the commander of that army did not even want to receive the wreath of commendation. Do you know why? He said, he just didn't think it was fair because he said it was as though God was against them. That's how easily they routed the Jews. Folks, there's coming a day where the God that we've invented in our minds and the God that we speak presumptuously of and the God that we act like we know, there's going to come a time when the true and the living God enacts everything he said in this book. Please, while it's today, make sure that you are saved and that you are not an object of wrath because you're a sealed child of God. Please make sure that you're prepared for the last days. Okay? Verse 23 said the king was glad. He was glad that Daniel was okay. Now, let's come for just a minute, and I want to see the end result, then I'm going to close. The end result is Darius praised God. He wrote a decree to all the people, nation, languages, verse 25, that dwell on the earth. Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is a living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. No, his dominion shall endure forever. Let me correct that. He delivers, he rescues, he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered. Listen, this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, the reign of Cyrus the Persian. They tried to kill him and remove him. They died instead. And Daniel kept going. He prospered. He had a higher place. Now, I want you to listen carefully to these words. Hebrews chapter 11, the chapter of faith. Verse 33, who through faith subdued kingdoms, through faith worked righteousness, obtained promise, stopped the mouths of lions. Who's that a reference to? Obviously Daniel, through faith. He had faith in God. Quenched the violence of the fire. Who's he talking about? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So we see two instances in the chapter of faith that reference two of the stories we've read in Daniel. Escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned the flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead by faith, received life again. Others were tortured. Others not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, of chains and imprisonment. These people of faith were stoned and they were cut in two. They were tempted. They were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. Exhibit A, we have the champions of faith, whom God delivered in magnificent spectacular ways. Exhibit B. We have the same level of exuberant faith in God. Men and women who were killed and tortured, cut in two, wandered about without a dime in their pocket, destitute, hungry, no place to live, of who this world was not even worthy to have. Champions of faith. You see, we think everybody who says, I'm going to go the way of God is going to be delivered. And look, both of them were delivered. Just some of them in ways that we love to cheer about, and some of them in ways that we know it happens and we know it's true. But somehow we think, well, if they really were of faith, bad things wouldn't happen to them. That's just not true. So, Christian, listen to me. In this, and I'm not going to lie to you. And young people, I want you to hear me on this. This world is cruel, and it's hard, and there's nothing about it easy. And nothing is promised to any of us in this world. God will take care of us. He'll clothe us. He'll make sure we have food. But He does not insulate us from bad times and hard things. There's some people in here old enough, and not many, to know some of the days in the United States past where it got rough. But most of everybody in here, including myself, we've lived in a time of prosperity. I can't even imagine what some of my grandparents and great-grandparents lived through. I think we're going to live through some of that. And I think we better be prepared to trust God in the times of lean as we've trusted Him in the times of fat. Let's bow together. Father, I pray and ask You to help us to move beyond the frivolous, the meaningless, the temporal, the stuff that doesn't matter, and help us to have our minds and hearts set on Thee and Thee alone. May we learn from Daniel, who 3 times a day bowed on his knees before his Creator and prayed and sought You and listened to You. And God, as we go through Daniel, we're going to learn that You revealed Yourself to Daniel in ways that are just outstanding. They're stupendous. Now, Lord, tonight as we look at this very familiar story, I don't know that any of us will ever be cast into a den of lions. But I do know that if we stand for You, unapologetically stand for truth, Your Word tells us, and You told us, that we would be hated for Your name's sake. So be it, Lord. Help us to be true to our faith and our commitment to Thee. Help us to be loving and kind and merciful and meek. Lord, may those who attack and those who harm, those who go after any believer come to shame because of the character of their lives. But Lord, even if they mean harm and achieve harm, help them not and help me not to ever be in a place of wanting to exact vengeance, but that I might believe the Lord my God and rest in Him in all things. Father, if there's somebody here tonight, they may never have considered the reality of the last days and the reality of the fact that the Christian is promised to never be condemned. The unbeliever and the one who rejects light and prefers darkness has been promised that they'll face condemnation and wrath and judgment. Lord, it's not a scarecrow, it's a fact. Lord, You didn't save us to send us to a rest home. We are in a battle. We're soldiers. We're called to act, to be disciplined, to live the life of a soldier in this world for Jesus Christ, to be counted, to serve, to love, to obey. We need to know what Your Word says, and we need to communicate with the one who leads our lives. Forgive us, Lord, for our unbelief. Forgive us for fighting battles that You never intended for us to fight. Forgive us of relying on our own strength. And help us, Lord, to recognize the source of true strength and victory. Lord, for the perpetrators in our life, for the ones who will come against your people, for the ones who will seek to hurt them and harm them, I pray, God, that you might intervene. That those that mean ill would be caught in their own snares, fall in their own traps, and be exposed for who and what they are. And Lord, we give you glory and praise and honor and majesty. We love you, Lord. Father, I ask all this now in the name of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.